thought it'd be interesting to start out not with a wine person per se, although Rory is very definitely a wine person. He has his own winery. It's called Calder. But Rory doesn't make any Zinfandel at Calder, which is actually not surprising. I remember my son Morgan saying to me, "I'm not making Zinfandel, you've done it all." And in fact, Rory comes from incredibly zinny bloodlines. So Tres Savors is his mother, and Frog's Leap is his father. And this is what you get. You get a brilliant young man who actually knows a huge amount about viticulture. He obviously knows about winemaking too. But he also is a great emblematic vision of what kind of the next generation is, because he's done all these kinds of things. So, Rory, welcome. Do you have your mic?
I do.
So, tell me, if I don't fall off the stage here, that wouldn't be cool. You grew up in the wine business. You had a mother and father in the wine business, right? Mm-hmm. And when did you actually start playing around with grapes and wine?
Wow. So, I mean, I guess you could say that one side was old enough to stand the folks. They would, my folks were very busy, obviously, starting the winery when I was a little kid, and my dad and my mom would pick me up from school, and then drag us out to the crush pad because they had to crush grapes or they had to go, take care of business until later in the afternoon. And I remember, to keep us busy, my younger siblings and I, as we were growing up, to keep us busy, they would give us a bucket of water and a paddle and just have us sit there and stir it and just go around and around until that water was well stirred.
Early biodynamics.
Yeah, exactly. Make it a compostee, and we didn't even know it. But really, it was like you said, Joel. It was really not until coming back to the Napa Valley after having been away on the East Coast for college and gone away and looked at and worked harvest in other parts of the world that I really came back.
Tell us about college. Where'd you go to college, and what'd you study?
Nothing to do with wine. It was a little college called St. John's College in Annapolis, Maryland. It's a tiny little liberal arts school. It's all philosophy and books, which it was a big interest of mine when I was growing up. And I had this inkling. I mean, growing up in a wine family, you always have this inkling that grapes are something that you might want to get into at some point. I also knew that I had plenty of time to get into that, and so I wanted to do my own thing for a little while I was at St. John's, which is this, you're reading all the time. It's all, writing papers. It's obviously very intellectual. After about a couple of years, I got the itch to do something physical, and took a year off from that, went and worked in Barolo and worked in Argentina as well for several months. And not places where they grow Zinfandel, but definitely got yelled at in a few languages I didn't quite understand at the time, and came away still loving wine. It was my kind of first exposure to really being outside of the family umbrella, and found myself just loving it.
It's one of the hallmarks of your generation is that you've been able to go to other places where the wine business is thriving as well, and been able to work there, and you bring back stuff from there, whether you even think about it or not. It's part of it. So you didn't just stop there. You went on to do a little bit more education.
Yeah, so after St. John's, worked in Burgundy a little bit, but then did some graduate work at Cornell, not actually technically in enology or viticulture, but in flavor chemistry, which is extremely exciting. But it was interesting because this was up in the Finger Lakes region of New York, where there are lots of grapes up there, as we all know. All of the research dollars for flavor chemistry, and I knew this going into it, was from wineries up there, figuring out what the characteristic aroma of Riesling is, which means you're sniffing elutions out of a GC port for a few months, which was not super what I wanted to do with the rest of my life exactly, but it was a great way to get paid to study chemistry and come back. And after freezing my butt off for a couple of years in the Finger Lakes, that's when I came back to Napa and worked one harvest at another winery in Napa, but then really got started with my own project. And that was when Calder started. Calder for me was kind of I make grapes like Charbonneau and Riesling, Chenin Blanc, Petit Syrah. Notably, none of them are Zinfandel. A large part of that was because I was, obviously at least auxiliary connected to Tres Sabores and Frog's, both of which make Zinfandels, and had in my hands, had access to a lot of Zinfandel already. And I suppose I probably signed some sort of non-compete agreement when I got back into the business as well.
Probably when you were born. It's probably stamped on your back.
Exactly.
You didn't completely divorce yourself from your parents. You still work with them, right?
I do, and that was kind of the real revelation for me coming back into the business was that my dad is a winemaker and my mom is a winemaker, and part of that life means that they've been involved with grapes and involved with viticulture. We've been big believers in organics for 30 years now, but a lot of it was, they were coming from the winemaking side, and then that was their path to viticulture, to growing grapes. I kind of wanted it to be the other way around. I knew that there was a bit of a gap in the knowledge in my family of how do you prune a grape? How do you prune a vine? How do you assess a vine? I remember it kind of struck me growing up, after I came back, it kind of struck me that I'd always just kind of looked at vines and been, okay, looks good. I didn't really know what a well-pruned vine looked like. It turns out the only really way to learn that is to go out there and prune them. So I spent I joined Frog's Leap officially in 2012, and I worked on the vineyard crew for 3 years every day, learning how to prune a vine, learning how to leaf a vine, learning how to manage the canopy, learning how to thin a vine, learning how to read what a vine is capable of and how it's responding to not just a particular rainy, how much rain there was that year or how sunny it is or how hot it is, but that particular piece of soil underneath that vine and how is that affecting where that vine goes. That was something that I knew that was kind of my path into a new way of understanding grapes, and that was my path that is my current path with Zinfandel. So I am a vineyard manager for Frog's Leap, and I completely manage my mom's vineyard for the Tres Sabores vineyard.
And Tres Sabores, the vine's been in the ground since how long?
1972. Yeah. The connection between the two wines here is the Tres Sabores estate is a little 7-acre Zinfandel vineyard in the middle of Rutherford that my folks bought when I was 3 years old. Bought in 1987. We moved there. The vines had already been planted for about 15 years at that point, but that was kind of our beginning with organics and our beginning with dry farming and kind of really beginning to understand what all that was.
So you came back, you looked at this vineyard, your mom's vineyard, you worked with it for a little while, and you said, oh,
it needed a little work. It was, like I said, for years you kind of look at it and, hey, it looks good. And I came back and after kind of building my knowledge of viticulture, realized that the vineyard needed a lot of work. It needed some tender and sometimes not so tender care of the vines had some eutypa, which is a trunk disease, which can eventually kill a vine if you're not careful, if it's not pruned correctly. This took the form of breaking out the chainsaw and cutting off diseased cordons.
And what was your mother's response to that?
She tried to stop me. She tried to take the chainsaw out of my hands, and I eventually just had to say, "Mom, trust me. This needs to be done, or else the vines aren't going to continue to live." And
I think you told me she burst into tears and you had to lock her in the house.
I had to give her a project elsewhere in the winery and just say, we are not fighting with a chainsaw in between us right now. That seems like a recipe for disaster.
The Napa Chainsaw Massacre.
Exactly.
It was more than a vineyard. I can see it. It's a film now.
Yeah. So it's been a huge privilege to now that initial incident was 3 years ago, and we just finished pruning the vines last week, and they are responding like we know vines can. These are old vines at this point, but they require that renewal. They require that sometimes a bit of a brutal interaction but they're responding beautifully, and they've been producing good fruit, and they're going to be even better this year.
It's fantastic. Do you do anything with the soils? You sound like you mentioned dry farming, which I think is important. Are you doing any soil building cover crops or anything of that nature?
Oh yeah, you got to do cover crops. We plant heavy peas, oats, vetch, 3 different types of vetch. These are all nitrogen fixers, soil builders. There's lots of voluntary mustard. That's really kind of the core of organics is building, farm the soil in order to farm the vines, in order to farm the ranch. And that's kind of been a big, when we got there in '87, the grapes had been conventionally managed for several years at that point, and we decided to kind of look beyond beyond what we were told to do, and started looking for other advice, and ended up listening to a bunch of wackadoodles who we now call good friends, so the vineyard has now been dry farmed and organically grown for about 30 years. And I should mention that '87 was the first year that we ever got grapes off that ranch. So the '87 Frog's Leap Zinfandel and the 2015 Tres Sabores estate are kind of bookends of that vineyard for me, and the interaction that I've had with that vineyard in my
So you
life.
want to tell us a little bit about the 2 wines?
Yeah, absolutely. So Tres Sabores, so I should say, my folks started Frog's Leap together. They divorced in the late '90s, and now they own their own separate wineries. My stepdad also makes wine. My brother makes hard cider. I make wine. Christmas is lots of fun. And so '87 was most of the fruit for this Frog's Leap 1987 Zinfandel, which I think we should maybe go through first.
That's your glass.
That's
second
wine number
glass.
2. A lot of that fruit, it's 100% Zinfandel going into this wine. Most of the fruit from that vineyard, actually in 1987, most of it actually didn't go into the Frog's Leap. A lot of it was we were barely getting by at the time, and we ended up getting a good price from Behringer for the grapes. So thank you, Ed Sprague.
White Zinfandel? White Tribidrog.
But that kind of held us on for another year while we tried to pay off the mortgage, essentially. But 100% Zinfandel. This would be pretty minimal amounts of new oak. But talking about acid freaks, I definitely think that the house palate, and I'm no exception, is to have a slightly higher acid style of Zinfandel. My dad always talks about, and now I go out when we go out and sample Zinfandel. We're not even so much, you take a berry in your mouth, you pop it in your mouth, and you're tasting for flavors. But now it's not even so much sweetness or acid as you're listening to the sound of the berry in your head as you crunch into it. And ripe Zinfandel has this crisp kind of crunch to it that I've been taught basically that means it's ripe. That usually corresponds with a little bit higher acidity, and I think our Zins, age your Zins, folks. They go the distance, and they're really beautiful wines. They tend to get a little claret-like as they get a little bit older.
So you have the '87. Was the 2015 made the same way, or have winemaking styles sort of changed? And obviously your mom may do things a little differently than your pop.
Yeah, so the '87 Frog's Leap, that would have been kind of in a stainless steel tank, pump overs. The Tres Sabores, our style now for that is a pretty minimal amount of extraction. So all these grapes get sorted and destemmed into small tea bins and then hand punch downs for a week or two until they get nice and dry, and then about a 25% new oak on this. But the big thing with Zinfandel that I think we're trying to capture is just this feeling of Zinfandel is not unique, but its defining characteristic for me. What I love about the grape is just that incredible vitality to the grape. It's got so much energy to it, and it's so friendly. It's such a happy and almost bouncy wine in that respect. And trying to capture that tension between this big exuberant fruit and keeping that energy focused is a lot of what we do. I think the Tres Sabores I often get a lot of floral notes out of, and that comes, I think, from limiting the ripeness just a little bit, and allows a lot of these complex flavors to pop out.
Great. Thank you, Rory. Yeah. That was really interesting. Thank you for giving us the sort of the basic, because every wine begins in the vineyard, and without the people who work in the vineyard and make that happen, the wine just doesn't work out too well mostly.
That's definitely true.
Yeah. So thank you very much.
Nice work.
And I have been negligent in my slide shifting. So I got to clear over to Jess now. I think we're okay. Jess, how are you, man?
I'm great. How are you?
We are moving from the beautiful Napa Valley to the beautiful Sierra foothills.
Yeah, Amador County.
So, so what's it like living where you get nosebleeds?
Oh, I try to avoid nosebleeds. We're about actually, our vineyard runs from about 1650 to 1750 elevation.
Yep.
And we actually, you can't see in this photo in particular, but we have the Sierra Nevada snowcaps in the distance. So I usually can go out and peek and see if it's too windy to go skiing.
I was going to say, how long does it take you to get to the slopes?
About an hour and 15 minutes, depending. Today, they got 7 or 8 inches, so it probably would have taken me an hour, 45 minutes.
Well, thank you for showing up here.
Yeah, right?
I mean, it's been a bad season, you know,
Right.
from the standpoint of water and snow. So,
There's no friends on powder days.
yeah, indeed.
Yeah.
How did you? Now, you didn't start out wanting to be in the wine business. You went and did other things as well before you got in the wine business.
Yeah, actually, the vineyard was purchased by my parents in 2004, and at that time, I was attending school at University of Colorado in Boulder. And unlike Rory, I was doing less reading and more enjoying.
Was there skiing there too?
There was a lot of skiing going on there as well, yeah. But I studied economics, math economics, and I went out and I pursued real estate investment and insurance, and then the last thing I did before I moved back was actually medical software.
Well, that would drive anybody into the wine business.
Oh yeah, I'm so glad to not be doing that anymore. I'll tell you that much. Totally
So, when
different.
did you end up coming back to the winery?
So I actually, in 2007 and 2009, while I was in school, I did what my dad would call internships, but it ended up being 10 or so hour days in the vineyards doing pruning throughout the whole summer. And that's where I got my first understanding of the vineyard. And then I moved back full time in 2013. So next month I'm a good 5 years in.
That's great. Well, good to get started when you're young.
Right.
You know, sometimes you'll inevitably get old, but you know, there's a lot of time between now and then. So,
Right.
fantastic. So, do you have any sort of icons in Amador? Because you guys ended up in Amador. Why'd you end up in Amador?
So my parents are from the Bay Area, and they had a lot of interest in the wine industry and used to go up to Sonoma, Napa. But they did a private tasting with Kerner Rombauer and had mentioned to him during that tasting that they were looking at trying to purchase a vineyard to, they called it semi-retirement. It's no longer that. And Rombauer, if you don't know, has been purchasing grapes from Amador County and El Dorado County for quite a bit of time for their Zinfandels. And he mentioned to them that Amador County was the place to look. And they left, I think, the next weekend or 2 weekends later and drove up and started driving around and actually stumbled across our current vineyard property. And very quickly after that ended up purchasing the property.
So, when you got there, they had already started making wine, and were they getting advice from anybody else up there?
Yeah, so there's Amador County, like Sonoma Napa, has some icons who've been doing it for a very long time. And there's a gentleman by the name of Buck Cobb, who some of you might be familiar with if you know Zinfandel. And he had Carley Winery, which is now the property that's owned by Turley. And Turley has a taste room there. And one of the great things about Amador County is it's a very small community, and Buck used to come over and help really just teach myself and my dad how to properly run the vineyard. And so he would come over and we'd have some questions for him, and we'd be sort of rapid fire asking him a ton of questions. And so he was one, and Dick Cooper was another. They really lent us a lot of advice and insight in terms of how to properly manage the vineyard, how to prune, and really what to expect in terms of full management of our vineyard. The vineyard was established, first vineyard vines were planted late 80s, early 90s. So we did a lot of overhaul in the years 2005 through 2009 in terms of ripping up and planting anew and doing all sorts of that stuff.
So your soils are that typical granitic soil that's up there in Amador?
Yes, granitic soil. So we have, our particular area is actually the Shenandoah Valley, and our vineyard sits in like a bowl, and it's all glacier dug out at the foothills. And so we have really fine granitic soil with a little bit of clay and sand, just generic sand.
Is it relatively deep, or is it thin and shallow?
It's a little bit of both. We have, I don't think we go as deep. Most of our vines are in that 10 to 12 feet max. There are some old vines that are going deeper in our area because sometimes that granitic soil can be very thin once it gets through the clay. But we have, on our property, we've done a lot of excavation and pulled out 700 tons of rock.
I hope you're planning to build something with that.
We built a cave. So my dad's an engineer, and he's always dreamed of having a wine cave, I guess. And they typically, instead of digging a hole and putting a top on, they wanted to do a real one, and they were trying to drill it out. But they got 10 feet in and then had to dynamite blast the rest. So our neighbors hated us for a bit, and it took an extra 3 or 4 months. We pulled 650 tons of large granite rocks out of there.
Wow.
No gold. We were the fools there.
That's economically, damaging.
Right. Well, now it's, now we're at, I think, just from an economic standpoint on that, we are a couple years away, 2, I think, from that project fully paying for itself.
Fantastic.
So one of the things we focus on is sustainability, and that is now, we actually have internet in our cave and electricity for lights, and that's about it.
That's the most important thing.
Yes.
So you grow Zinfandel, obviously, but you also grow Primitivo.
Yes, we do.
Which is the other Zinfandel.
Yes.
Some call it Zin Clone P, but it really is Primitivo. So is there a difference between your Zinfandel and your Primitivo?
We actually, we grow them right next to each other. The Primitivo's at the top of our vineyard, and it is like the name lends itself to the first red grape that we pull out during harvest. There's minor differences in terms of how the plants are looking. Some of the leaves are a little bit different, so it's fun to show the 2 different leaves and how the colors change. So you actually, during the fall, you can stand at the top of the vineyard, and there's a distinct difference in terms of the foliage and the colors. And then we actually end up with a stronger white pepper versus a black pepper coming from the Primitivo on our particular vineyards.
Interesting. So winemaking, how do you approach that? You have evolved from an intern to having your hands in virtually everything.
Yeah. So when your parents own a vineyard and winery, you end up doing everything. And I now manage our wine production. We actually, my mom is our full-time winemaker, and so I'm learning and working directly with her. It was one of those things when I first moved back. It was my dad, Charlie, my mom, Michael, and myself. And then Dewey, who is actually here as our taster manager. It was the 4 of us doing all of our production from 2013, 14, 15. Now one of my brothers and another worker helped me out during that. But we actually will pull, we have about 8 different varietals on our vineyard, and we source quite a few other ones. But learning from that, there's nothing more inspiring from the back end once we get to this point than knowing exactly what we did to this wine, when we did it, how we did it, and learning that whole process. It's way more interesting than medical software.
So let's talk about the 2 wines. You've got the Bella Grace Reserve, Amador County, and you have the Estate, Amador County, glasses 3 and 4. One's 2014, one's 2015. You want to talk a little bit about the differences and what's the same? Yeah,
so we have 2 really fun stories on these. The first one is the 2014 Reserve. This is 100% old vine Zinfandel. This isn't grown on our vineyards, but it's grown on a vineyard about 3 miles down the street from us called Crane Sleeper Ranch. If you're here at this event, you know Amador for being sort of the origination of Zinfandel. There's some arguments there, but Crane Sleeper Ranch is a heritage vineyard. It dates back to the late 1800s. The blocks we pull from are 60 years old. They're dry farmed, head pruned, So they meet all the characteristics we're looking for. And what we did in 2014 is, if you guys remember, that's sort of the peak time. That was a great vintage for the wine industry in terms of the drought and the impact it had. And so we had really stressed out vines, and we ended up with, I think it was about half to 2/3 of the yield. And instead of making a lesser known or a standard old vine Zinfandel, we decided to go reserve. So this actually is 50% new French oak. It's a barrel selection from what we had and aged inside of our wine cave. So it's a very fun showing in terms of what we can do with the different grapes out of Amador.
And it's 100% Zinfandel?
It's 100% Zinfandel, yeah. So we used, on that, it's a lot of French oak. We've moved a lot of our Zinfandel to French oak, with the neutral being French and American, and some Hungarian hybrids.
And the second one?
The second one is from our estate. So right below the Primitivo, we actually have 4 different blocks of Zinfandel. We, in 2009 now, ripped out some older non-producing vines that just really weren't doing well and planted 2 new clones in there. So we have 4 distinct clones, 8 to 16 years old. And this is a blend of those 4. From our vineyard, we can produce about 1,400 cases of Zinfandel. This is the 2015 Estates Inn, which is a barrel selection. We produced only about 300 cases of this. So this ended up being about 30% new French oak. And we're really zoning in, and it's fun. We have 100 glasses on the table, trying all the different blends from the different barrels. And so that's a different play. You'll see a slight difference in terms of the fruit characteristics between those two. And we're showing you a little bit younger wine right after an old vine.
So stylistically, you're clearly not going after those 1970s Amador County wines, which were like 16% alcohol and like 4 grams residual sugar and about enough tannin to rip your mouth out if it hadn't been for the sugar. Clearly, what's your vision for Amador Zin?
So I think the first wine you tried is actually 14.7%, but the second wine, the 2015, is 14.2%. And one of the hats I wear is a salesperson. So I think what we're trying to do here is make a wine that you guys want to drink a lot of. And as easy as...
Got to pay for those caves, guys.
Yeah,
drink
got to
up.
pay for all this stuff. So, but I think it's very important to us and our growers in Amador to see the sort of how Zinfandel can evolve. You'll find in Amador there are a lot of those 15, 16% sort of mouth puckers, and we're sort of, these 2 wines are really today's wine. These are our take on it. It's blending the old sort of farming styles with a new take on making the wines.
Fabulous.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Jess. Really appreciate
Thank you,
your
Joel.
Amador wines and your presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And now we move on to Yolo County, which is not someplace that most people think about when they think of Zinfandel. And we move on to Nicole. And Nicole has been
Joel.
doing this for a while.
2005 was my first production job.
And
Bought wine before
yeah,
that.
but you took a long route for that. You didn't exactly start out on the West Coast, did you?
No, I'm from New England, Vermont,
Yep.
and so I grew up shoveling snow and chopping wood. I'm the oldest of 3 children, the only girl.
That's good training for punching down wine.
If I only knew then. But I always dreamt, I had the California dream. I wanted to, when I was a kid, I wanted to move to California and go to college here. But that didn't work out. I wound up going to college in upstate New York, where I studied political science. My father's a carpenter. My mom, she went to nursing school when I was in high school. So I'm from like a lower middle class family, but I put myself through college, and I wanted to be an environmental lawyer, when I was 18. Second year into college, I realized I never could be a lawyer. I'm a horrible liar. I did.
Hope there are no lawyers in the audience.
But I really was enjoying my environmental science courses, and I just fell in love with geology. That was my first passion. So I took all the geology courses I could take. And although I did graduate with a degree in poli-sci, I had more credits towards geology, and that's what brought me to California. I wanted to come to grad school out here.
Yeah, but you actually came out and did something. You had an aunt connection out here who does interesting stuff, and you managed to hang out with her for a little while, right?
I was fortunate enough, my dad's oldest brother lived in Davis, and his wife, I had never gotten the chance to hang out with too much, but they were so kind, and they said, you could come and stay with us for a year, see if you like California. So I jumped at that opportunity, and my aunt was incredibly intelligent, wonderful chemist. She has a PhD in chemistry from Duke, and she's retired now, but she had her own environmental lab based in Davis, but she's real smarty. And she loves teaching, so she actually helped me get my first job out of college at an air lab, where that's where I really got involved with
An
the
air
world of
lab. Think about
chemistry.
this. They sample the air.
It's important.
I've heard of airwar before. Are you looking for airwar? Are you looking for eucalyptus effects?
That was a job that lasted about 2 years. I absolutely hated it. And I thought it was really just like straight out of college. I wasn't, 8 hours a day sitting at a desk sort of deal. Like maybe this, I just need to get used to it. But it was so sterile. I thought it was pretty boring. And it just wasn't for me. But in the meantime, I was taking a lot of chemistry courses and learning a lot. But one day I just said, I'm tired of the commute. I was commuting an hour each way to Folsom in traffic and from Davis. And I had some waitressing experience. So I said, I'm just going to get a waitressing job and focus on some math courses and get myself into grad school.
And you ended up in effectively a wine shop waitressing business. I mean, like you ended up in like Wineland.
Yeah, I got really lucky because I was literally just looking for a job. So
you ultimately had to learn about wine by tasting. You really didn't come into it with any sort of preconceived notion. So you ended up in a situation where you could taste a lot.
that is definitely true. The man who owned this wine shop, it was called Tuco's in Davis. It was a European-style shop, and this man had been collecting wine for decades and was truly very passionate about tasting, and pretty much took me under his wing, and within, 6 months, I was made the wine buyer to my surprise, and I was meeting with all of the people that were selling wine, and it just so happened that this shop sold rare and hard-to-find wines, so I was tasting some really high-end, great stuff.
So what's it like to have guys like us coming in and saying, Nicole, you're the person who's going to change the fate of my wine. What can I do to make you happy?
Absolutely.
Can I give you a big deal? Can I bring you some special wines? Yeah. What was it like? And actually the other corollary for that is what's it like being on the other side of that now?
Oh, that's interesting. Well, I will say, I would meet with distributors, and my favorite was always to meet with the producers because I really learned a lot from them. And we always let the wine speak for itself. So, people who did sell wine to us, they knew if they start talking it up so much, the wine's not speaking for them itself. They're speaking for it, and it's just a little off-putting, personally. But so being on the other side now, I don't know. It's tough to sell wine. I love making wine, but it is tough to get out there in front of the buyers.
So, would you rather be a buyer or a seller?
Buyer. For sure.
That is tough. You kind of went from there. You saw an opportunity to be in the wine business, and you jumped at it. About the same time, of course, you had been working to get into a geology graduate program, and you ended up getting entrance to Stanford. And you didn't go to Stanford, did you?
No.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, by that time, a patron at that wine shop was a winemaker named Mark West. He was my first mentor. He was starting a new winery with growers from Winters, where I now live, and he's like, yeah, you seem like, I'm looking for an employee for my new winery. What do you think? And I said, let me see. Waitressing or working in a winery? I will absolutely go to work with you at the winery. So he was another really smart man, PhD in biochemistry from Johns Hopkins, I believe, but really passionate about teaching. So he taught me a lot. And luckily this was in Davis, so I was also taking a lot of courses. Eventually, I don't know, like 4 years later, I wound up starting the winemaking certificate program, which was very valuable. For me, I feel like I got a lot more out of it after having some hands-on experience.
So you moved around a little bit from one winery to another. Then somewhere along the way, you did what all the young people of your generation is. You ran away from California to make wine someplace else.
That I did. I went to New Zealand, to Marlborough, and that was inspired by a 2012 harvest that I worked in Napa at Kenzo Estate. With Heidi Barrett would fly in our helicopter and come and taste the wines, and it was such an interesting place to work. I was vying for a cellar position, so there was 5 people on the harvest crew. I was the only female, and all of us at the end of the harvest, one person was going to be hired full-time. And this was such a cool winery with amazing wine, so we all, of course, wanted that job. One of the first days I was working there, we were vineyard sampling, and I will never forget tasting their Sauvignon Blanc off the vine. It was phenomenal, just fell in love with it right then and there. They focus on Bordeaux varieties, and still to this day, their Sauvignon Blanc's my fave, and I did not get that position. Long story short, the guy who drove the forklift the whole harvest did, but I think that was a blessing in disguise because I said, maybe I'll take this Sauvignon Blanc path. So I applied, and it's been a harvest in 2013 in Marlborough, and it was really.
And the winery was?
It was actually a custom crush house, but mainly mud house.
Mud House.
But New Zealand Wineries Limited.
Can get into the muck in a place like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you learned a lot about Sauvignon Blanc, but you also saw a lot of women winemakers. That could serve as role models, n'est-ce pas?
Yeah, that's true. This custom crush house, there were 16 different wineries, ranging from all different sizes, and my favorites were a couple of women. This one Italian lady and a very memorable Kiwi woman named Jules Taylor. She I don't know, if you ever get the chance to taste those wines, they're amazing, but she just was very encouraging and very nice to everyone. And, sometimes you have the winemaker that they've earned their keep, and you're the cellar intern. There was 60 of us, and, why would they want to talk with you? But this woman, I got to spend time with her every day, and she really was an inspiration to me.
That's great. So you come back, you get more involved in wine, and you ultimately end up in charge, through one fate or another. We probably ought to touch on your wines before we run out of time, but do you want to talk a little bit about these 2 wines?
Yeah, I just completed my 5th harvest at Berry-Sagat Vineyards. I have mainly worked in Yolo County. I think it's a hidden gem that there are not a lot of vineyards planted there, but there's a lot of microclimates, and it has a really rich agricultural history. So 2013 was my first harvest. I'm not going to lie, it's not my favorite wine, but we're tasting it today, so you can get an idea of kind of where I started at the winery. I'm the second winemaker there. We have a really special estate-grown vineyard. It was planted in '98, and our parent company is Martinez Orchards, so our winery stemmed from a successful rootstock company. And that was started in the 60s. So the family that I work for, they planted this vineyard after doing a lot of research and selling a lot of great material. So this was actually made in my predecessor's style. I used the same yeast, and I just didn't want to rock the boat too much when I came in. And I learned a lot.
So
changed it
small
ever since.
fermenters, and so I guess maybe the way to approach this is, So you have this other wine. So what did you change? What did
Lots
you
of
bring
stuff.
that you thought would make the wine more
Everything's
interesting?
hand-picked, everything's hand-sorted. 2-ton fermenters mix 3 times a day. We do inoculate because we happen to be in a building with a brewery. So the second wine, it's
Nothing
a barrel
like good
sample.
beer yeast in wine, huh?
Yes, that is true. So 2016 Zin is a special fermentation technique that I had heard about, and it's called submerged cap. So we fabricated these stainless steel screens that we put on top of the fermenter, and instead of mixing your cap in with your juice the whole time, the cap's always submerged, and you get, I think, a lot of different darker flavors. We are in a hot climate, so we tend to get a lot of red fruit, which you'll notice in the 13, and I think we are closer to the mark with the 16, getting some more blue fruit, and you also get, I think, better aromatics, better color
So
concentration.
typically you pick at the end of August, early September?
Yep, the red's always the first. We start our harvest in July with the whites, and then our Primitivo, this is 100% Primitivo you guys are tasting, grown on clay soil, a little alluvial, about 50-foot elevation. But, wait, what's your question?
So I thought I should also mention that submerged cap technique is what Ridge uses as well.
Yes.
So it's a pretty classic approach to winemaking. There are other people who play with it for various things. It's much more gentle and less extractive, of course, than punch down.
I think it makes a more elegant wine. It's rounder. I've noticed it's more age-worthy. The number 5 wine, or the 2013 Primitivo, our Zin is 14.5, and this is closer to 14. So our goal is lower alcohol.
So your goal is brighter, fresher, more acid. Hey, this new gen is doing this thing. They're bringing Zinfandel back into sort of classic form. Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you.
Really appreciate your wines. Appreciate your input.
Thank you, Joel.
Thank
It
you
was
so
fun.
much.